I am Evelyn Hart. And they said I was too expensive to keep. 2 months later, I was the one signing the termination notice, right in front of my former boss. I didn't slam doors. I didn't raise my voice. I simply took back everything they thought they had stolen from me and dismantled the deal they considered untouchable. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Mark Denton, my direct supervisor, couldn't meet my eyes as he shuffled through papers that would determine my fate. The HR director, a woman whose name I'd never bothered to learn, sat rigid beside him with the kind of practiced neutrality that comes from delivering bad news professionally. "Evelyn," Mark began, his voice catching slightly. "Due to recent budget constraints and the need for organizational restructuring, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position." I studied his face. 23 years in consulting had taught me to read people like balance sheets, and Mark was hemorrhaging anxiety. His left eye twitched when he lied, and it was practically spasming now. "The severance package is standard," the HR director continued, sliding a manila envelope across the polished table. 2 weeks' pay, continuation of health benefits for 30 days, and a reference letter. 2 weeks. For 6 years of building their most profitable client relationships from scratch. For creating systems that turned a struggling consultancy into a market leader. For generating revenue that kept their lights on and their executive bonuses flowing. "Any questions?" Mark asked, finally forcing himself to look at me. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. The severance was insulting, the reference letter was generic, and the non-compete clause was laughably broad. They wanted to erase me while ensuring I couldn't compete with them for a full year. "Noted," I said, closing the envelope. That was it. No tears, no pleading, no dramatic exit speech. Mark looked almost disappointed by my composure, as if he'd expected me to give him a reason to feel justified in his cowardice. I walked back to my office for the last time, past the cubicles of junior consultants who avoided eye contact, past the conference rooms where I'd pitched winning strategies, past the corner office that would never be mine. My personal items fit into a single banker's box, a few books, a coffee mug, and a framed photo of my parents. At the elevator, I turned back to look at the lobby one final time. The company logo gleamed on the wall behind the reception desk. Barrow and Creed, Strategic Excellence. I memorized the scene, filing it away in the part of my mind reserved for useful information. The elevator doors closed, and I began planning. My apartment felt different that first day. Quieter. The absence of my work phone's constant buzzing created an unfamiliar stillness that I found oddly comforting. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The document I created was deceptively simple, a spreadsheet titled The Ledger. Column A, Client Names. Column B, Services Provided. Column C, Systems Implemented. Column D, Revenue Generated. Column E, Current Status. I worked methodically, reconstructing 6 years of relationship building, process optimization, and strategic victories. Each entry was a small piece of the empire I'd built under Barrow and Creed's banner, using their resources but powered by my expertise. The crown jewel was Forgewell Manufacturing, a mid-size industrial company that had become Barrow and Creed's largest account. I'd landed them during my second year, when they were hemorrhaging money and considering bankruptcy. Through a combination of operational restructuring and strategic planning, I'd helped them become profitable again. More importantly, I'd become their trusted advisor, the person they called when they needed to make critical decisions. My phone buzzed. A text from Travis, the junior analyst who'd taken over my desk. "Hey Evelyn, having trouble accessing the Forgewell client portal. Do you know the login credentials?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Travis was a smart kid, eager to prove himself, but he'd been thrown into the deep end without a life jacket. The Forgewell account was complex, built on relationships and institutional knowledge that couldn't be transferred in a brief handoff meeting. I didn't reply. Instead, I added a new column to the ledger: Vulnerabilities. My LinkedIn profile took shape over the following days. Independent strategic consultant had a nice ring to it. professional but not desperate. I uploaded a photo where I looked approachable but authoritative, and crafted a summary that highlighted my achievements without mentioning Barrow and Creed by name. The first few inquiries were modest: a family-owned restaurant chain needing help with expansion planning, a tech startup requiring operational guidance, a manufacturing company struggling with supply chain optimization. Small projects, but each one allowed me to rebuild my confidence and establish my reputation as a freelancer. Meanwhile, my phone continued buzzing with messages from former colleagues. Travis texted 3 more times about various ForgeWell issues: a dashboard that wouldn't update, a report template that kept crashing, a client meeting that had gone badly because no one could answer basic questions about their operational metrics. I documented each request without responding. The pattern was becoming clear. Barrow and Creed was discovering that institutional knowledge wasn't transferable, that relationships couldn't be inherited, and that systems required more than just login credentials to operate effectively. 2 weeks after my termination, Mark called directly. "Evelyn, I know this is awkward, but we're having some technical difficulties with the ForgeWell account. Would you be willing to do some consulting work just to help with the transition?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. I let the silence stretch until he cleared his throat nervously. "I'm currently committed to other projects," I said. "But I appreciate you thinking of me." It wasn't entirely true. My calendar was manageable, but I had no intention of rescuing them from their own incompetence. They'd made their calculation. I was too expensive to keep. Now they could live with the consequences. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing proposals for a new client. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Ms. Hart, this is Jennifer Walsh from Executive Search Solutions. I have an opportunity that might interest you." I listened as she described the position: a temporary strategic consulting role at a major manufacturing company. The client needed someone with specific expertise in operational efficiency and vendor relationship management. The pay was excellent, the timeline was flexible, and the project had high visibility within the organization. "Which company?" I asked, though I'd already guessed. "ForgeWell Manufacturing. They're looking for someone who can hit the ground running on a major strategic initiative." I almost laughed. After 6 years of building their business, cultivating relationships, and creating the systems that made them successful, they were hiring me back as an independent contractor, at triple my former hourly rate. "I understand they're having some challenges with their current consulting firm," Jennifer continued. "They need someone who can work independently and deliver results quickly." "I'd be interested in learning more," I said. The irony was delicious. Barrow and Creed was struggling to maintain the relationship I'd built, while ForgeWell was actively seeking outside help to address problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. I scheduled the interview for the following Monday. ForgeWell's headquarters looked exactly as I remembered: glass and steel rising from a landscaped corporate campus, with the kind of understated elegance that suggested financial stability. I signed in at the reception desk as a visitor, received a temporary badge, and was escorted to a conference room where 3 executives waited. David Chen, the CEO, greeted me with a firm handshake and the kind of smile that suggested genuine relief. We'd worked together extensively during my time at Barrow and Creed, and I could see the recognition in his eyes even though he didn't acknowledge our previous relationship directly. "Ms. Hart," he said, "we've heard excellent things about your work. We're hoping you can help us with some operational challenges we've been experiencing." The next hour was a careful dance of professional courtesy and unspoken understanding. They described their problems: inconsistent reporting, communication breakdowns with their consulting firm, and a growing sense that they weren't receiving the level of service they deserved. I listened, asked thoughtful questions, and provided insights that demonstrated my understanding of their business. What they didn't say was more revealing than what they did. They were frustrated with Barrow and Creed, but bound by a contract that made changing vendors expensive and complicated. They needed someone who could work within the existing framework while providing the expertise they'd lost. "When could you start?" David asked. "Immediately," I replied. The following Monday, I walked into Forgewell's offices with a visitor badge and a laptop, ready to document the destruction of everything Barrow and Creed had built on my foundation. Working at Forgewell as an independent contractor was like returning to a house I'd designed but no longer owned. The conference rooms were familiar, the faces were known, but my role had fundamentally changed. I was no longer representing Barrow and Creed's interests. I was serving Forgewell directly. The first week was diagnostic. I attended meetings, reviewed documentation, and analyzed the systems that had been implemented since my departure. The decay was systematic and thorough. Reports that had once been models of clarity were now filled with generic language and recycled content. Data that had been meticulously maintained was inconsistent and unreliable. Processes that had operated smoothly were now bureaucratic and inefficient. I documented everything with the precision of a forensic accountant. Each error was cataloged, each inefficiency was measured, each failure was traced back to its source. The pattern was clear. Barrow and Creed was providing the bare minimum service required by their contract while charging premium rates. More importantly, I began to understand the scope of my leverage. Forgewell's leadership trusted me in ways they no longer trusted their primary consulting firm. When David needed strategic advice, he called me. When the operations team needed clarification on a process, they asked me. When the finance department wanted to understand a particularly complex analysis, they requested my input. I wasn't just a contractor anymore, I was becoming an advisor. The invitation came via email from David's assistant. The Q4 Vendor Review Committee would like to invite you to participate in the evaluation process for our strategic consulting services. Your expertise would be valuable in assessing current provider performance and future needs. I read the message twice, savoring the implications. The Q4 Vendor Review was where Forgewell's leadership decided which contracts to renew, which to modify, and which to terminate. Being invited to participate meant I'd have direct input into Barrow and Creed's future with their largest client. The committee met in Forgewell's executive conference room, a space that commanded respect with its floor-to-ceiling windows and polished mahogany table. 5 senior executives sat around the table, each representing a different aspect of the business: operations, finance, technology, human resources, and strategy. Before we begin, David said, I want to acknowledge Evelyn Hart's contributions to our discussion. As an independent consultant, she brings an objective perspective that will be valuable in our evaluation process. The next 2 hours were a systematic dissection of Barrow and Creed's performance. I presented my analysis with the detached professionalism of a medical examiner, laying out evidence of poor service delivery, cost overruns, and declining quality. Each point was supported by documentation. Each criticism was backed by data. The finance director leaned forward as I concluded. Based on your analysis, what would you recommend? I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. I would recommend that Forgewell consider alternative providers who can deliver higher value at competitive rates. The room fell silent. In corporate speak, I'd just delivered a death sentence. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Barrow and Creed's team would have 90 minutes to convince Forgewell's leadership that their contract deserved renewal. I'd been asked to attend as part of the evaluation committee, a role that placed me in the uncomfortable position of judging my former employer. I arrived early and took my seat at the conference table, reviewing my notes one final time. The rest of the committee filtered in over the next few minutes, each greeting me with a respectful nods due to someone whose opinion carried weight in their organization. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference room door opened, and Mark Denton walked in, followed by 2 junior consultants carrying laptops and presentation materials. He stopped mid-stride when he saw me, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and what might have been fear. Evelyn, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I didn't expect to see you here. Mr. Denton, I replied, gesturing to an empty chair across from me. Please, have a seat. We'll begin shortly. The presentation that followed was a masterpiece of corporate mediocrity. Mark relied heavily on PowerPoint slides filled with buzzwords and generic promises. The junior consultants fumbled with technical questions, clearly unprepared for the level of scrutiny they faced. When asked about specific deliverables, they referenced outdated reports and incomplete analyses. I said nothing during the presentation, but my presence was clearly unnerving. Mark's eye twitched continuously, and he kept glancing at me as if expecting an interruption that never came. When the formal presentation ended, David opened the floor for questions. The committee members asked pointed questions about cost efficiency, service quality, and strategic value. Each answer revealed another gap in Barrow and Creed's understanding of Forgewell's needs. Finally, David turned to me. Evelyn, do you have any questions for Mr. Denton's team? I looked directly at Mark, noting the sweat on his forehead and the tension in his shoulders. No questions, I said calmly. I believe we have all the information we need. Mark gathered his materials with shaking hands, and his team filed out of the conference room in silence. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. The committee's decision was unanimous, though I abstained from the formal vote to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Forgewell would terminate their contract with Barrow and Creed at the end of the current quarter and transition to a new provider. The termination letter was a work of art, crafted with the precision of a legal document and the coldness of a medical diagnosis. It cited specific performance failures, documented cost overruns, and referenced the committee's loss of confidence in Barrow and Creed's ability to deliver strategic value. I didn't write the letter, but I reviewed it before it was sent. Each paragraph was a small masterpiece of corporate communication. Polite but devastating, professional but final. The message was clear. Barrow and Creed had failed to meet their obligations, and their services were no longer required. The letter was signed by David Chen and copied to Mark Denton, the HR director who delivered my termination notice, and the senior partners who'd approved my dismissal. Within hours, it would be sitting in their inboxes like a bomb with a long fuse. I was having lunch with the CEO of Axis Strategy Group when my phone buzzed with a text from Travis. Did you hear about the Forgewell contract? I deleted the message without responding and returned my attention to the conversation. Axis was exactly the kind of firm that could handle Forgewell's needs. Agile, responsive, and hungry for the opportunity to prove themselves with a marquee client. The transition would be seamless. The client would be satisfied. The work would continue. And somewhere across town, Mark Denton was probably sitting in a conference room, trying to explain to his partners how they'd lost their largest account to a woman they'd fired for being too expensive to keep. My contract with Forgewell ended on a Friday afternoon in November. I packed my temporary office, returned my visitor badge, and walked to the parking garage where my car waited. The security guard nodded as I passed, and I realized that most people in the building had no idea who I was or what I'd accomplished. That evening, I opened the ledger one final time. The spreadsheet that had started as a simple inventory of my professional relationships had become something more, a roadmap for quiet, systematic justice. I'd proven that competence couldn't be eliminated by budget cuts, that relationships couldn't be transferred through org charts, and that revenge was most effective when served with professional excellence. I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow, I would begin new projects with new clients, building new relationships and solving new problems. The work would continue, as it always had, but tonight, I would allow myself a moment of satisfaction. 3 months ago, I had been too expensive to keep. Today, I had cost them everything. The phone rang as I was finishing my wine, an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Ms. Hart? The voice was young, nervous. This is Travis from Barrow and Creed. I hope you don't mind me calling. I waited. I wanted to thank you, he continued. I know you didn't owe us anything, and I know this situation is complicated, but I learned a lot from watching how you handled everything. You were professional even when they weren't. You'll do fine, Travis, I said. The industry needs people who care about quality work. Are you hiring? He asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Not yet, I replied. But I'll keep you in mind. I hung up and deleted the call from my phone's history. The ledger was closed, the accounts were settled, and the work continued. In the end, that was all that mattered. Some victories don't require celebration. They simply require competence, patience, and the understanding that the best revenge is success served with surgical precision. I had been too expensive to keep. I had become too valuable to lose. And that made all the difference.